Hello students, I hope all is well. I'm here with another tutorials request video. This one is for front-end nanodegree project 7, right? Now, there's a lot of students asking for project 7. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There are 8 students asking for project 7, which is the React neighborhood map project. And there are a lot of concerns being asked. I see the map is one of them. What else? Getting started, service workers, tying an item with the marker on the map, where to begin, components and info windows, implementing list view and location filter, fetch lifecycle. So there are a lot of concerns for this project. So in this particular video, what I want to do is normally I would split each of these concerns into its own separate video, but to give like, I guess, a cohesive explanation and walkthrough, I'm going to consolidate all of these topics into this one video and add little links in the description that I'll jump to each part of these topics that I will cover. So basically what I want to do is show how I did it, things to look for, and how to prepare your application for submission so it can pass. And I'm going to do that by going through each section of the rubric. So there's about 8 of them: interface design, application functionality, asynchronous data usage, documentation, location details functionality, accessibility, offline use, application architecture. So I'm going to go through each of these sections and compare my project against this rubric to show you how I did things and how it passed. I actually did it earlier today. It passed, it finished. So I'm just going to share my code, my tips, and basically just go through the entire project with you. So with that being said, I want to get started. I have my project here right now. So just at a quick glance, let me just reload the page. So at a quick glance, we have the map right here, which is the main section of the page. I have a navigation bar at the top, and I have the sidebar here at the left. Now, you can scroll around, you can click the markers. They have an animation, they jump, and then they have an info window with an image. Now, these locations are coming from the Foursquare API, which is what I'm using. I'm also using the Wikipedia API to get information about this particular part of Maryland. If I click the info button right here, we get a modal, and it shows us the query that we search for in Wikipedia, and I'm just pulling it right here. Now we have a input, text input right here to filter the markers and the list. So if I were to search for, let's say, X, we can see the markers are gone and the list shrinks to every item that matched this input, right? Now we can scroll down on the sidebar. You can click the list items. They still animate the marker. It jumps to that part of the map where it's located. And we also have links on the title. If you click it, it will bring you to a new tab with the name and location of that place, right? All the links on the page have a title attribute. This has a title attribute. If we click it, we can toggle the sidebar from showing. It will show by default, but still, the toggle feature is there. And it works fine on desktop. It looks fine on desktop. It looks fine on mobile. You can see that the text shrinks, so it can still have room for this button right here, giving it a mobile first experience. for users. If I open the DevTools and we come to the application tab in the DevTools, we come to Service Worker. We have one activated and running. We have cache. We're caching all of the assets that the page needs. Images. We have a restaurants app.db. I have two stores inside of it. One for AJAX calls or the response of an AJAX call, and another store which has all of the venues which are coming from the Foursquare API. So basically I'm using Google Maps API, Google Street View API, the Wikipedia API, and the Foursquare API, right? Now once I cache them, I won't need to send a request every time the page loads because it's going to check the IDB first. So just to give you an idea of what that looks like, I'm going to clear the site data from the browser. So the cache is empty, indexedDB is empty. The server worker is still there, but the assets are gone. So once I refresh the page, I'm going to hold shift and click this to clear the cache. Now, if we look in our console log statements, we can see I have log statements saying fetching venues, fetching Montgomery County Wiki, storing them in IDB, and then stored, right? Now, if I were to refresh the page, it's logging, returning values from IDB, returning Montgomery County Wiki from IDB. So basically, I configured it to check IDB first before fetching the resources that the page needs. When we come back to the application tab, we can see that our cache is full again. We have the assets we need, and we have all of the objects and information that the page needs. So that's basically the project in a nutshell. You don't need any other routes. This is basically a single page application. It's accessible. We have title attributes, alternative text attributes, or the alt attribute. We come to the images, we can see alt is right here. We're using semantics, right? So I'm using nav tag, not just div. I'm using section, and I'm using main to signify that the map is the main part of the page. I'm using the area hidden true on the map and role application. I'm not using much of the role attributes for everything else because native semantics like nav will imply that elements inside of it are focusable, right? So I won't have to add the role navigation because the nav tag implies that it's for navigation. And same thing for section here. So normally you would have an input, or I'm sorry, you would have a label that would describe an input, but that's up to you. It can still be accessible without it, but according to accessibility standards, every input should have some sort of label that describes what it is. So I guess for your project, you would want to add like a label on top of this that will help screen readers tell disabled users what this input is for. So there's that. This is an H3 tag, but I want it to be focusable, so I added the tab index to it, which allows you to tab to it and trigger what it's supposed to do. So if you notice that if I press tab, you can see this little blue line around it, letting us know that you can focus on it. And if I were to click the enter key, it still toggles the side menu, right? So by doing that, we can still interact with the page without having to use a mouse. If I hit tab again, if I hit enter, it brings up the modal. You can use the escape key to get out this, but if I do that, the screen recording would stop, so I'm not going to do that. But you can use the escape key to release the modal. I'm going to click away. I'm going to press tab again. It moves to the input, text input. And for each list item, if I were to inspect it, each list item I also gave a tab index 0 so you can focus on it. And if I hit enter on it, it will still toggle will still execute the same feature as if I was clicking on it with the mouse. So I can tab through each of these list items, right? It still do the same thing as if I was clicking on them. It will jump to that part of the screen, animate the marker, and show the info window. And filtering, same thing. You don't need a mouse, you can just tap through it. I scroll out, you can see all the markers are gone because nothing matches the filter. And that's about it for this project. Mainly what you're looking to do is make it responsive, so it works on all media screens, mobile, right? You can see that at some point, if I keep scrolling down, the sidebar is only going to be as wide as the screen is, or if it's big enough, it won't even reach that far. Nothing's coming off the screen. Everything is scrolling just vertically, nothing scrolling horizontally. Images aren't too big, they're not too small. You can see them clearly. The contrast, color scheming, every text is easy to read. It's not hard to read any text. You can add little CSS effects like changing the color when you hover over it, things like that. Give it a modern feel. And working offline. Yeah, so that's about it for this project. Now, let me show you how I did it in my code. So what I'm going to do is start going through each of the sections and show you in my code how I did what I did, right? So the first section is the interface design. So the two specs are responsiveness and usability. So as far as responsiveness, when you're using elements, or I'm sorry, when you're using like CSS properties, you're going to want to use max width. And by doing that, you're going to let the browser know that at some point, the width of whatever element you're setting will only be as wide as the screen, and that's going to prevent elements from going off the screen. So for example, if I were to click or inspect the sidebar right here, I have width is 325 pixels, but max width is 100%. So that's going to account for devices under 325 pixels. So for example, if I were to come to the iPhone 4, we can't scroll left or right, but we can scroll up or down. And that's because the max width kicks in. Whenever the width is bigger than the screen is rendered on, then it would only be as wide as the max width, which is 100%. So I say that's your best friend, max width for block level elements. You know, inline elements, you won't have to worry about it taking up the width because normally it will wrap to the next line, but block elements, you're gonna you want to make sure that you have your widths set properly. And the reason why I have width is because if the screen is big enough, let's say iPad, I only want it to be a certain part of the screen. I don't want it to stay completely proportional, right? I don't want to have it at 50% because some screens it'll be too wide. So for example, let's say instead of max width, let's say I just kept it at what? 35%. or let's try 50% or 45, right? So let's say it's 45% the width. This is really big, right? As the browser gets bigger, the sidebar gets bigger. I don't want it to get big, you know, after a certain point. I want it to stay the same at a certain point. So I don't want to use percentage just by itself, you know. If I were to scale it down, it may look good, but you scale it down too much, then you can see the images coming out. It's very thin, you know, it's not really that good. So just to demonstrate, you know, things you can do as far as laying out and being responsive design. Let me just refresh that and put it back to normal. So that's why I have both my width properties. Now in your CSS, basically you just make, that's, I say the bulk of it is just making sure your widths and nothing going off the screen, right? Now with Bootstrap, the grid-based layout, normally things would wrap. If you have a row, then all of the columns would wrap to the next line at some point. I don't see much of a need for Bootstrap in this particular project, but if you find a need or if you find it would be easier for you, then by all means use Bootstrap, right? You may want to set a media query, and that will help you run some different styles at different widths, right? For example, at some point, this shrinks in size, so I can still fit this icon button. If I didn't do that, let's say I don't have this icon, and it's still big. If I keep scrolling, it goes away because it can't fit no more. So that's why I decrease the font size so it can still fit at smaller screens. So just setting media queries to account for different breakpoints and setting your widths. I'll say that's the biggest part of the responsive design. Now, the second spec was usability, right? So all application components are usable cross-platform, right? So you can come to DevTools, try out your page in different viewports, different screens. Try an iPhone, try it on the smallest. Believe it or not, there are still people out there who use iPhone 4. So as a developer, you have to account for that and design your page to look its best at every device possible. So even on the iPhone 4, nothing's coming off the screen. Everything still looks clean. If I were to click on any of these list items, you know, everything still looks clean and fine. So making sure that everything is not coming off the screen, just test out on different devices, use the dev tools, test out different styles, and see what works, see what doesn't work. You know, there's no way of getting things right the first time. So give yourself time to just test things out, test certain styles out, right? Now, wrong one. So the rubric. So usability. I would say just using icons help. You know, this lets us know that we can open the sidebar, and once you click it, I have an X letting us know that we can also close the sidebar. So visual cues like that helps with the UI, letting users know and easily guess what this control, what this button does. And that's pretty much it as far as my application. I don't have too much going on, so there's not much of a hassle dealing with UI and UX. So I think that does it for this section. So as far as application functionality, so location filtering. So you're gonna need a text input that will filter both the map markers and the list items. So like how I was showing you earlier, let's say I wanted to filter the markers for anything with a J in it, and we get nothing. Let's do D. We get a few, right? And we can see it's filtering both the list items and the map. If I delete it, we can see this bar shrinks, letting us know that there's more content to scroll through. Now, let me show you how I did that. Now, inside my App.js, well, let me start at the indexedJS. So here I have my start service worker. This is my own function. I'll get to that when that portion comes, but inside my index, we just have the app root. Inside of the app root, I have a lot of code actually. I was just prototyping this. It took me about 5-6 hours to do this entire app, just prototyping it. I can clean it up later, but basically I have 4 components that I created. One is the map div, one is the sidebar, nav bar, and info modal, and I have a little utility file with functions to help keep things clean here. Inside of the app class, I have a lot of methods, and inside the constructor, I'm just binding those methods to this component, so the reference can be saved when I pass them as props to these components. Where are we? So I have a function filter venues, right? So when this method runs, basically I'm just going to, well, actually let me show you where query is coming from. So here in my sidebar, I'm passing the filtered prop. Filtered is just all of the markers that are filtered, right? And then what method was this? Filter venues. So I'm passing that method to the sidebar. Filter venues right here. So when I come to the sidebar, in that input, I have a onChange event. So whenever you type into it, I'm going to call that props method, the filter venues, and I'm going to pass in the event target value. So when this method runs, I'm going to pretty much do a ternary. So if there's a query, right, meaning it has value, if it's not blank, then I'm going to filter the venues, right? Now in the filter, give me all of the venues where the query is included in the name. And the reason why I'm using lowercase is because I don't want the case sensitivity to throw off the query. So even if it's uppercase, lowercase, I don't want that to throw off the query. So actually, what if someone types in an uppercase character? So I should technically add that method to this string too. So they're both lowercase, so it can match, right? Same thing here. So basically this variable f, which is short for filtered, if there's a query, I'm going to filter the venues for all the names that has the query included in its name, right? Now, if there isn't a query, then I'm just going to get all of the venues. So that way, once the input is blank, or if it's blank, all of the results can come back. So if there's no query, then just give me back all of the venues. Now, for the map markers, I'm going to go through each of them and pretty much use the same logic. If the name property of this marker has that query included in it, then we're going to set it visible to true because it matches the query. And if it doesn't, then I'm going to set visibility to false. And once we have these two ready, I'm going to call this .set state, and filtered would be F, which is the query we're comparing, and query would just be the input query. Now when we call set state, it's going to cause a re-render. So the next time this page renders, the filtered prop, which is coming from state.filtered, will only show the markers that match the query, right? So that's how that portion works, or that's how I did it. And just to give a demonstration of includes, I'm going to come to new tab and let's say JS, which is short for JavaScript, string includes. And let me show you this page really quickly. So the includes method determines where the one string may be found within another string, returning true or false as appropriate. So basically, this is a new method I learned. Instead of doing like index of equals to like -1 or something longer, I found this new method. I'm not sure when JavaScript came out with it, but it's here. So you can do the word sentence that includes word, right? So basically, you can check a string within another string. And that's what I'm using inside of my method right here. I'm just checking if this query is within that venue's name and just filtering that way. Same thing for the markers. If the query is within that name, then I'm going to set the visibility as appropriate. So that's how I did that particular portion. List view. So list view of location name is provided, which displays all locations by default and displays the filtered subset of locations when a filter is applied. So the filter portion I just showed you, the list items are coming from the API, and I'm going to show you how I set mine up. Now, clicking a location on the list displays unique information about the location and animates its associated map marker. List functionality is responsive and runs free. Alright, so now let me go over how to even generate a list. Right now in my page, my sidebar is on the left. I'll come to my CSS. The way I styled it was position absolute, right? So it can pretty much do its own thing. It's not going to disturb every or other elements on the page. I'm going to set the Z index to 100, right? So that way it can be on top of the map and still under the map, or rather the navigation bar. The height is calculating 100 view height, which is the entire browser, minus 60 pixels. And that 60 pixels is for the navigation at the top. Now, I have box shadows, background, the width properties, already went through that, and the overflow y equals scroll. So that way, even though when I scroll, the sidebar is still here. So that's why I added that overflow property. And I nested another div inside of the sidebar to add the padding to it, which is why we can see the spacing right here. Nothing's touching the very edge of the page. Now, once we have a spot for the locations or the list items, inside my utility function, I have a function called load places. So basically in this function, I'm calling get venues, and this function is right here. So basically I'm going to use IDB and get all the venues inside that object store. Now once that resolves, we'll to check the length, and if it's greater than 0, meaning we have venues, then I'm just going to resolve that, right? I don't need to make any fetch request or anything like that. I already have venues inside IDB. Now, if I don't have any, then that's where you see these console log statements, fetching venues. I'm preparing this API URL. It is for the Foursquare API, right? If you go to the documentation page, they'll show you how to prepare a API URL, client ID, client secret. Once I have the URL, I'm going to fetch it and then get the JSON response. Now, once I get the response, I'm going to get the venues out of it. I'm going to store them inside the method store venues, which is right here. So inside this method, I'm basically checking the input, the venues argument. If there's none, if it's not an array, I'm going to reject it. If the length is 0, I'm going to reject it. I'm going to loop through each, and if any of them is not an object or they don't have the ID property, I'm going to reject it. If it passes all of these, then it's good. I'm going to start a transaction, get the store, and for each venue, I'm going to put that venue in the store. And then once that's done, I'm going to return transaction not complete. So once I store the venues response inside IDB, I'm going to resolve it, right? Now, once we have all the information back inside my app component, once the component mounts or component will mount, I'm going to get Google Maps, which is this method right here. Once I get it, which is right here, it returns a promise. Getting the venues returns a promise, right? Utils.load places, which was right here. Once I load all of the asynchronous things, I'm going to resolve all of them, and I'm not going to proceed until all of them resolves. If any one of these promises doesn't resolve, then this catch method right here will fall through, and it's just going to alert error loading the page, right? So I have 3 promises, one for getting Google Maps, one for getting the venues, and one for getting the Wikipedia link. As far as the Wikipedia link, the method is right here, which is load wiki. Same thing with the load places. I'm going to check IDB first. If there's a result, I'm just going to resolve that. If there's no result, then I'm going to fetch it. And the reason why I'm using jQuery is because for some reason Fetch doesn't like JSON-P, so it was giving me a lot of errors using the Fetch API. So I decided to use jQuery, and it works fine because of this little data type method that they have. So somehow jQuery works fine with JSON-P. So anyways, once I fetch it, then I store that response inside the IDB, right? And then I'm going to resolve that promise. So once all of these promise resolves, I'm going to get Google, get the venues, and get the wiki data. I'm going to create a list for the markers, one for the info boxes. I'm going to save a copy of Google to the component property, save a copy of the info window, save a copy of the map, right? So this .map. And I'm just going to create a new Google map the default way. I'm not going to use another component for Google Maps because a lot of them couldn't do the things I wanted to do, like marker animations. It was hard. It was difficult trying to tie things together. So I found it much easier and more flexible to just use Google Maps directly instead of through some component library. So I have that. For each of the venues, what I'm going to do is create a marker, create an info box, right? Now inside marker, what I did was You have to give a position property. That's required when using Google Maps marker. You create a new one. The position is required, but you can also you can add other properties to it, right? So we have position, we have the map, we have venue, we have ID, and name. And the reason why I added name is I can filter each of the markers by this name property later on, right? In that filter method I showed you. And animation is google.maps.animation.drop. So whenever the page loads, we see the markers drop. Now, I'm creating an info box here. It's just string concatenation. I'm just replacing certain parts with the venues information. I'm adding a click listener to each of the markers. Remember, we're still in this for each loop right here. So for each marker, I'm going to add this animation. If it's not animated, right, then we're going to set animation, else we're going to clear it. So let's say I click it, you can see it jumps up and down, and I set a timeout where it's going to stop it in 1.5 seconds. And when I click the marker on Google Maps, it's going to set the info window content to this string right here. We're going to set the map zoom. We're going to set the center of the map to the marker position. We're going to open the info window on this map with this marker, and we're going to pen it or pretty much move it to that marker's location, right? Now, after creating all this information, I'm going to push the markers to that list we created. I'm going to push that info box that I created into that list. And I'm creating an object so I can filter it later, right? Filter by ID or name. And then we have the contents right here. Now, after the loop, I am saving this, I'm saving the venues to this components property, saving the markers, saving the info boxes. This utils.sort by is just a method I created to like sort an array by property. So basically I'm just sorting it alphabetically. Once we have all of this information, I'm going to call this.setState, right? Filtered by default will be all of the venues, so it can show all the locations. I'm going to save the Wikipedia data, and I'm going to save, or rather than save, I'm going to set the sidebar open to true. So when the page loads, by default, it's going to show the sidebar. Now, if I were to open my DevTools and I look inside this array right here, I'm console logging all the values from the promise that got resolved. The first one is the Google Maps. The second one is an array of all the venues from the AJAX request. And the third one is the response from the Wikipedia AJAX. Right, so we have Montgomery County, Maryland. Here's a string, which is just a quick summary. And then the last one is a link. And that's what's being populated right here. All of this is coming from that Wikipedia AJAX call. Now, once I have all that set in the read renders, that's where we pass that filter list to the sidebar, and the sidebar is pretty much gonna check if there is a filtered props, and if there is, then we're just going to map over them and return a list item for each of the venues, right? So that's basically how I set my page up. Going back to the rubric, that's how I'm populating it. Now clicking it, for each of the list items, I have an on-click event listener. What I'm going to do is call this.props.li_click. I'm going to pass in that venue that we're at in this iteration. So for each list item, we're gonna register this onClick method. Same thing with onKeyPress. We're going to call this the li key press. So this way, when someone focuses on it with the keyboard and the tab, we can still trigger the animation. So looking back at app, you passed li click and li key enter. If you look at li key enter, we're going to check the key code. If it's 13, which means they press the enter key, then we're going to call this the li click. And li click, all it's going to do is accept that value we passed. We're going to filter the markers that we saved earlier. We know that it has an ID or has venue ID. Same thing for the info boxes list that we have. We're pretty much going to get that exact marker, that exact info box. If we do get a match from both, which we should, it shouldn't fail, then we're going to animate the markers and we're going to set the info window, basically. So once they click it, we're going to call li click, and it's going to get this out of the list that we have and just set it. I'm going to animate the marker and then set it to the map. Right? Now, the filtered, I showed that earlier in the method. We're just going to filter each of the venues and markers, check the name against the query. If the query is included, then we're just going to set the visibility and then filter that out. Now, all of that should have it run without error. So I guess these two would take care of that itself. Clicking on location and animate marker. Alright, so there's that. So map displays all location markers by default and displays the filter subset of markers when the filter is applied. So I guess these two are somewhat related. The filter will apply to both the list view and the map markers. Clicking a marker will cause an animation, right? So whenever we click a marker, we have the info window. We set that up inside the when this promise resolves and we're inside the venues loop. We added this event listener to the markers for clicking it. We'll set the animation, so that takes care of that. Clicking a marker displays animation by default. Right, so that takes care of that. Now, asynchronous data usage. So application uses Google Maps API. All data requests are retrieved in asynchronous manner, either using the fetch or XML HTTP request. So I suggest creating another utility file, and inside this file you're going to write your functions that will load your API data, right? I also recommend creating another method that will pretty much get items out of IDB and store items in IDB. So that way, inside your method, let's say for loading places, whatever API you choose, I recommend Foursquare, but for whatever API you use, you want to have a way of checking inside IDB first, so you can save yourself of the need of having to fetch data across the network. Only fetch it when there's nothing in IDB. Tie all of that into this promise, so that way all you have to do is just call it for whatever component needs it. Let's say another component needed the venues information. Instead of tying it inside of this app component itself, we just have it as methods in a utility, right? Now, error handling. Make sure that you're using promises. I don't recommend using callback functions anymore unless you really have to. But yeah, I say use promises because you can chain on as much then methods as you want and then still chain on a catch where if any of the chain of then methods fail, the catch will fall through, right? So For this method, I have catch for this then once the IDB resolves, and also have a catch for when the fetch resolves, right? So there's that. There's that for the Wikipedia, same thing, just making sure I reject or catch any errors. So when it comes back to calling it in the app, all I have to do is call catch, right? So if any of this goes wrong or any of these promises don't resolve, I'm going to catch it and just alert error loading the page. Letting the user know that something went wrong rather than just failing silently. So that's it for error handling. Right. So user isn't left wondering. You can just make sure that you always use promises and you add a catch method at the end of the promise chain. Now documentation, the README, that should be easy. My README just has, let's see, if I do Control-Shift-M, let's look at it. So I have the heading, Udacity, the nanodegree, and the project I'm working on. Just some images. This text is coming from Udacity's front-end nanodegree page. This isn't my text. I just copied it. Here is actually what I wrote. This is just a brief description of what this project is, what it is to demonstrate, any limitations, things that issues. I have it deployed to Roku, the dependencies, the features, and how to run it, and then just my name at the bottom. So that's, I'll say, the biggest thing is just demonstrating, or rather explaining what this app is and its dependencies and how to run it. So those are the main aspects of your README. Now, comments, if you have like long functions like this here or this, I know what's going on, so I didn't write comments, but in the event that you're working in a collaboration project with others, so you're working in a group setting, it's helpful to have comments so you can understand what's going on. We come back to it at a later time. So location details, functionality, so additional location data. So functionality providing additional data about locations provided and source from a third party. You mark as info window and HTML. So for this particular spec, most students or most people, from what I know, would use the Yelp API. And last I checked, version 2 or one of the APIs were shutting down. So I tried looking at it and I couldn't really find out, or it was a hassle to just get it up and running with its client keys and tokens and pre-flight requests and things of that nature. It wasn't really straightforward, so you can use Yelp if you want to, but I know that it's probably not as easy as it used to be. So that's why I used Wikipedia, right? It's still third-party API, and it gives information about this part of the world, which is Montgomery County, Maryland, right? If you want, I see some students asking about Flickr, right? So there's the Flickr API and get more pictures of a particular location. I don't think that is necessary as far as passing. If you just want to pass, then I say use the Wikipedia. It's pretty straightforward and easy. You don't even need an API key for it. But if you really want to test yourself and push yourself and make the best project, then you can do that. I think I have a project where I'm using Flickr, so I will make another video tutorial on that. But as far as APIs, I'm only using Foursquare and Wikipedia, and that was enough to pass. So there's that. error-free, same concept applied, just making sure that in your code, certain things you can assert, right? Now here, for example, I'm fetching this external resource, and then I'm parsing the responses JSON. And inside this method here, this second then call, I'm assuming that JSON.response has a venues property, right? So you don't need a lot of testing. This probably isn't good because let's say Foursquare changes their API and they don't have this venues property anymore. That would crash this entire app, right? Well, not the entire app, but most of it. So you could say if venues, right, then you can proceed. If there's not venues, then there's something wrong. Basically, the things you want to check for are things that are coming from, I see, other networks. For example, API requests. Your own functions, for example, this, you can assert because you're writing it and you know how it should work. There's not much guessing you have to do. But with APIs and dealing with responses, sometimes you never know what you're going to get back. So make sure that you have like try and catch blocks and just account for unexpected things, which usually happens with APIs because APIs can update their policies and things can change. So just make sure you have error handling in place, like then calls for promises, or you can use the try catch block in case something goes wrong and things of that nature. So that's about it for asynchronous data usage. Documentation, README. I thought I already asked about that. No? Huh. But anyway, so documentation, wow, deja vu. We talked about documentation, we talked about asynchronous. So I guess we're on location details functionality. That's errors free, accessibility, location details functionality. Alright, so let's go over location details functionality. So data about a location is provided from a third-party source. So I just talked about that. There's Yelp or Wikipedia provide attribution for the source. Alright, so in my app, that's where I have this link. You click on it, it's just a Google search, right? So I don't think whoever grades this, that's not going to be too much emphasis on it. You know, if you want to add Yelp, I think Wikipedia will suffice. Error handling, same thing. Usability is prevented or presented in a usable, responsive manner. Yeah, same thing for the link. So I'll say the biggest thing here is the info window, right? For each marker, you want to have like an info window that pops up when you click on it. So that's why I created this massive string here that we can use for the markers whenever we click on it. We can set the info window to that box, info box that we create. Now, accessibility, so for focus. Now, focus is appropriately managed on users. What's the tab there? Right, so when the page loads, let's reload it. Now, I'm not sure what Google Maps is not open. But anyway, the first thing that should focus when you hit tab is that little button there at the top right at the navigation. So if I hit enter again, it still works without having to use the mouse. The next thing that focuses is the info button. Hit enter. It shows the modal. If you hit escape, it will close it, but I'm not going to do that. After that button, if I hit tab, it's going to jump to that input filter and then each of the list items inside the sidebar. I can hit tab and focus on each of them, right? Now, in order to do that, some of these elements aren't by default interactable, if that's a word. You can't really interact with an H1 the way you would with the button. It's not really meant to interact. So in order to add focus to it, I just added the tab index attribute to it. So in the nav bar, I have tab index 0 for H1. And then I added the on click and on key press listeners to give off that accessible feel to it, as if you were clicking on it. And same thing for the list items. Each of them have the tab index 0, which allows you to tab through them. And I added the on click and on key press listeners to basically simulate the same I guess functionality as if you were clicking on it. So it's accessible that way. All links have the title attribute. All images have the alternative text or the alt attribute. And you're using area roles and attributes when necessary. You're using semantics, right? So the sidebar has, instead of just using a div, I just added section inside of the nav bar. I'm using the navigation or the nav tag, right? Which is going to imply navigation inside the DOM. And inside the map div, I have the main tag, which is pretty much telling the browser that this is the main part of the page. Info modal is just a modal component, so not much accessibility needed there. Coming back to App.js, there's not much here. It's just pretty much rendering other components. I think that's about it for accessibility. Just making sure you're using semantic tags, all interactable elements. For example, this input should have a label. I don't have one, but yours should have one. And I think that's about it. Just attributes, labels, and HTML5 semantics. And that's, I'll say, the bulk of accessibility. Now, let's go on to offline first, right? So the service worker. Inside of indexedDB, I have this import statement where I'm importing start service worker, and then I'm calling it. Now, if you look at start service worker, it's basically the same thing as what you would do inside of the client, right? So if service worker is in navigation, we're going to register the service worker that is at the root of the development server or whatever server that this application is deployed to. So at the root, we're going to use this script for the service worker and add a scope / to tell it to control everything at the root, right? Now, in React.js, the root is the public folder, which is where that sw.js file is located. It's inside that public folder right here. Now, in here, this file, I actually copied this. This is what I use. The same exact file from my mobile web specialist degree program back when I did it. It still works fine. It's pretty agnostic in the sense that the events still work the same. I just changed a few things like the files I want to cache, cache names, and that's about it. Most of the logic stayed the same. So it worked fine. It was seamless. So basically, just again, start from the top. I created a file called start service worker. That one will register a new service worker, which is located at the root. In the context of React, that would be in your public folder. And that is where you would define all of the events and things that you want your service worker to do. Now, if you come back to the page and I come to the application portion, come to service worker, it's working right here. Now, if I were to right click it, open a new tab, you can see it's not working, and it's not working for some reason, but anyways, it's offline first, so it still works here, but you get the idea. So it's activated and working. We have the cache. Everything's working right now. It's not showing any. What is showing? Images. So that's working. I don't know why this isn't loading. I think my internet's down, but whatever. That's working. Now, that takes care of offline usage. Just registering the service worker, making sure things are caching. Same thing from Project 5. Now, application architecture. So, proper use of React. So, React code follows a reasonable component structure. So, basically, in your app, when I first submitted it, I literally didn't even have these 4 components. I did everything inside this one App.js because I was just trying to get it up and running. This is the first time doing this project, so I can understand what the students are going through. Now that I understand it, I kind of cleaned it up by creating new components and just passing all the props that I needed to it. Yours may look cleaner than this. This is just how mine look, which is fine. You know, there's different ways of doing the same thing. You want to make sure your files don't get too large, right? I don't think any component file should be past 200. That's just like my personal preference. You know, if you have a component file that's past 200 lines, then I guess that's for a reason. You know, you don't have more lines than you need. Just abstract as much things away as you can. You know, if something isn't, I guess, using a component method, like for example this, you can create your own utility file and just move it there, right? Like storing things inside of the IDB, I don't need that to be inside like a component method. That can be its own utility function. So that way, as this project grows, or if it were to grow, and you have more pages and more components, you can still access the same functions that you needed before. So there's that. I'm not mutating the state directly. Every state change is called or triggered by using the setState method. We're passing down all information to these components via the props, right? And I am binding all of the component methods to itself. So when I pass it, the context isn't thrown off. It still knows that this is the component to set the this reference to, even though we pass it. And there are at least 5 locations. So there are at least 5 locations in the model. These may be hard-coded or retrieved from a data API. Alright, so that's pretty much gonna come from whatever API you use for places. If I come, well, you can see here it says 50. I'll go out to application and we go to our indexedDB, go to my restaurants database and my venue store. We have same amount, 50. So there's that. And there are no errors, there are no warnings that resulted from not following the best practices and the listed in the documentation. such as using key. So all codes functional. All right, so basically that's just code quality. So if we come back to our page, come to the console, the fetch event for results in a network error because the promise was rejected. Socket. Okay, so these looks like, let's see what's going on. JavaScript file. Huh. Okay, so basically, this is from the service worker. Basically, whenever there's a request that's taking place, it's gonna try to cache it. It's yellow, so I guess it's a warning for some reason. Some of them from Google Maps aren't caching. Like, let me try to refresh it. Maybe it'll go away. Okay, so they're gone. Maybe my internet came back on. But the development server has disconnected. Next page is necessary. This is on Heroku. But anyways, those errors are gone. Request scheme. This is just service worker. You don't have to worry about this error. It's fine. If you come to the application tab of your DevTools, is activated, up and running. We have the green light for the status. So I say don't worry about this. Service worker registered. So this portion here, this is just my custom code. You may not have this. If you go to where is this? This is app line 68. Line 68, App.js. So I'm not sure why React is complaining about this, but it's still like valid syntax technically. You know, it's compiling, there's no errors. So I don't see why React's compiler is complaining about this, but whatever, it's fine, honestly. It's not like it's something severe. Like, make sure that in all your components, you're not importing things you're not going to use, right? Like normally inside of your, well, I don't have it running, but when you have your React development server running, it will show you little log messages such as this is imported but never used, or this variable is defined but never used. So as far as code quality, just make sure in each component file you're using everything you import, right? And you're using everything that you define. So getting rid of comments like this, right? Getting rid of comments, making sure that your code is readable, right? You're following the indentations, right? So everything that's nested will be indented further, like white space. And yeah, that's about it. If I come back to the rubric, there are no errors. Right, so we know that whenever we loop through an array and we return some JSX, for example, if we come to the sidebar, we see this little expression right here. We're returning JSX in a loop. We're going to have to use a key prop, right? Right here, the key prop. And this helps React distinguish each list item that's being rendered in this loop. So oftentimes that would be like the index number of the array item or something else, whatever you want it to be. So there's that. Checking for errors. So if this is defined, then we're going to loop over this. We're not just asserting that this.props.filtered is an array. So if I were to, let's say, delete that and run it, it would give an error because at first this would be undefined. This will only get its value after the page loads and pulls in the API data and then re-renders the page. So little things like that will help with error handling and the list items. There are at least 5 locations in the model. State control is managed, right? We're not mutating the component state directly. We're always using set state, which will update the component state and then cause a re-render. For example, let's say right here, we're adding the filtered property to the state, the Wikidata to the state via the set state method, and it'll cause a re-render. Follows a reasonable component structure, right? So by adding components, we save a lot of files, save a lot of lines in a file, and we can organize things and can pinpoint what we need to edit. You know, let's say a couple weeks later, you want to edit something, and you know exactly what to look for. You just come to whatever folder you have that you organize your project and then just modify that directly. So I think that's about it. I went through each of these sections, talked about each spec. If you have any questions, just leave a comment in the comment section below. I'm going to add a link for each of these sections so you can just jump through them. And I'm also going to post the YouTube video here so it's available to everyone who needs help with this project. So with that, I'm going to end this video. I hope you found it helpful and informative, and if there's anything I can do, just reach out. And I hope you have a good day. I'll see you guys later, and good luck.